Good evening and welcome to You Too Can Put Solar on Your House of Worship. And I'm Ken Wright of Faith Communities Go Green, and I'm going to be your moderator tonight. And I'm going to be assisted by another Faith Communities Go Green member, Ann Cooper. You want to wave your hand there, Ann, so people can see you?
Yes, Lisa.
Okay. Faith Communities Go Green is a collaboration between Green Umbrella and Equation. And we believe that faith communities have a powerful voice to offer as the world confronts the climate crisis. Our mission is to partner with religious communities to create a more sustainable and equitable future by mobilizing their moral voice to reduce the risk of climate change. And tonight, we're going to get a chance to hear from and talk with three experts with experience in putting solar on houses of worship. And they can help you get started on your solar project. And our first guest is, let me get the slides here. There we go. First guest is Gary Booth. He has a company, Starshine Energy, that operates solar farms in Kentucky. And he has found ways that an individual can allow nonprofit organizations to benefit from solar tax incentives. And he has installation sites that include churches, schools, and universities. Our second guest is John Hancock. And he is Professor Emeritus of Architecture at the University of Cincinnati. And he is here in Cincinnati. He's led Mount Auburn's Presbyterian Church project here in Cincinnati to become net zero carbon, including installing solar on their roof. And finally, but not last, we have Murray Rosenthal from Ann Arbor area. He's formed an LLC to purchase a large solar installation at Genesis of Ann Arbor. And Genesis is an interesting organization. It's actually a collaboration between two congregations, one Episcopal and one Jewish. He's president also of the board of directors of Solar Faithful, which is using an investment company to get solar installed at no cost to Michigan houses of worship. Okay, we've chosen these folks not only on the basis of their experience in organizing solar programs on houses of worship, but also because the approaches to how they did this are different. And by this, I hope to show you that there's a variety of ways that you can accomplish the mission to go solar, and that you need to look at a variety of methods and select one or more of them that work for your own situation. Now, before we bring on the speakers, I do want to take the moderator's prerogative here and tell you that I personally led my own house of worship, St. Simon of Cyrene Episcopal Church in Lincoln Heights, Ohio, to install a modest PV system on our own building. And let's see if we can show that. There we go. St. Simon's is a historically African-American Episcopal congregation in an African-American community north of Cincinnati. And because of our membership and because of our strong record of community service in Lincoln Heights and the area around it, we thought that we might be eligible for grant support for funding. So we applied to the Solar Moonshot program, which is administered by Hammond Climate Solutions in California. And lo and behold, we received a 50% matching grant for $19,000 from Bequest Foundation of San Diego. And we matched this with private donations and with a small amount of church funding. And in the end, as you can see here on the roof, we have a 15 kilowatt system that was completed at the end of July 2022. It has 41 panels on the south facing office roof, and it's been making about half of our electricity since then. I'm not going to include this effort in our discussion tonight because I think it may be something of a special case and how we funded it through grant and private donations. And I think the methods that we're going to talk about tonight are more translatable to other houses of worship. But if you think your congregation could be eligible for grants and you have members that would donate towards matching, I would certainly encourage you to consider this approach as well. There really is no one right path to making solar happen at a house of worship. Now, for the meeting itself, I plan to ask a series of 3 or 4 questions to each of our panelists. And after each question has been addressed, I'll leave a short period of time if they have any clarifying questions that need to be addressed right then. And if you have questions of that type, please put them in the chat function, and Ann will help us go through that. And after we've completed the more formal part of the presentations, we're going to open the floor to live questions by the audience, and or plus any that were in the chat already that may not have gotten discussed. There should be plenty of time for people to go through their questions. I have no specific deadline on when the program is going to be over. It's really up to the panelists and you all about how long you'd like to stay. So if the panelists could at some point put their email up on the chat function, that would be good. That way, if for some reason we don't get your questions, you can contact them directly and get your answers that way. All righty, let's begin with the first question. And I'd like each of the panelists to describe their solar installation and tell why they went solar. Mary, why don't you go first? And I'll put up slides if you want me to. You let me know.
Did you say Mary or Murray?
Murray, please. Sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, okay.
Okay, so could you put up the picture of the roof?
There we go.
Yeah, this is Genesis of Ann Arbor. As Ken mentioned, it's a 50-50 partnership between 2 diverse congregations, an Episcopal Church and a Reformed Jewish congregation. And there's 160 panels, 80 on the social hall, which is in the front, and another 80 on the back roof, or the south-facing roof of the offices. This installation went live right before the pandemic, February of 2020. It's been going about 3 years now, and it's providing about 31% of electricity pre-pandemic that we used. During the pandemic, building use is way down, so it's actually getting us a higher percentage. Why did we do it? Well, the main reason we did it is sustainability. We want our building to be green, and we're still working towards that, to be 100% carbon free. And we hope to do that by the year 2030. The panels were funded via an investment group. And am I supposed to talk about that now, or?
I do have a section for financing later on, so why don't we hold that part if you don't mind?
All right, I'll wait. So that's it.
Okay, very good. John, you want to go next?
The question that we're on is why did we do this?
Why did we do it, and what did you do?
Well, we put solar on the church on every available roof surface, but we did it as part of an overall facilities plan, which I want to talk about later, but put it into that context. But I think our motivation goes back to a long history with this particular church in Cincinnati as being very advocacy oriented. And if you could flip to the next slide.
Sure.
A lot of our emphasis has been on social justice issues. As you might imagine, that's a common theme for many churches, of course. So how did we add to that the theme of what the Presbyterian denomination calls earth care, And part of the thinking, part of the rationale was to recognize that the impacts of, climate catastrophes around the globe are, among other things, a huge justice problem. I mean, this is us doing it to them, by putting so much carbon in the atmosphere and raising global temperatures. So as soon as there's an understanding of that situation, it's a simple connect the dots to realize that even from a tradition of social justice concerns, this becomes an important question, an important program for the church to be advancing. And so, of course, from a facilities point of view, as is obvious, the issue is carbon-induced global warming. Of course, the connection between carbon and climate. And of course, that needs to be understood at the outset in order to begin to persuade your fellow parishioners that this needs to go forward. And I guess also in our faith context, we are always, realizing that we have to have faith and we have to have hope. But on my next slide is a wonderful quote from Greta Thunberg. Hope is something you need to deserve when you have actually done something about the problem, right? So we recognized and we persuaded our church leaders and parishioners to take action on the climate problem, on carbon and global warming, and we found that was persuasive to the church leaders and eventually the congregation, because we were relying on them for leadership and connecting us with the wider denomination and with the community. And also we were going to rely on them for some of the funding, which I'll also be talking about later. So that's why we did it. Right.
Okay. Gary?
Go, if you'd put on my first slide.
Yeah, let's see your way down here. Whoop, here we are.
Yeah. It's a little bit strange, but well, first of all, I'm from a very small town in eastern Kentucky, Campton, which is in Wolfe County, which competes for being one of the poorest counties in the United States. And I've done 3 solar installations on Campton, 2 one on a Baptist church, 1 on a Catholic church, and an elementary school. And the churches are wonderful stories, but I'm not going to talk about those tonight because the Campton Elementary School is the best illustration I have for tax engineering that allowed us to have the federal government pay for about 65% of the cost of the installation. And it's doable by any church, but that's why I'm using a school as an illustration for a church seminar. But let me talk just briefly about the churches, that I won't say anything else about them tonight. The Campton Baptist Church was started in 1848 by 3 of my great-great-grandfathers, so that church is in my DNA. They were about to go under because they had 3 obsolete heat pumps, and the congregation raised money and got a grant for geothermal. When I heard they had done that, I thought, well, let's finish it. So I donated enough panels for the roof to make them net carbon zero. And they were featured 4 years ago on the Weather Channel on Earth Day as being possibly the most efficient church in the US. And this community is so poor, nothing ever happens. So I'm wanting them to think that, yeah, they count. We're doing things that are important too for the climate. And in both the Catholic and the Baptist Church, there's a very high awareness of climate responsibility and also social responsibility. The church, actually both churches, are taking the money that they used to pay for electric utilities and turning that into scholarships for students from the area. And I'll have a lot more to say later on about how you get 65% of the funding for something like this out of the federal government. So,
Okay, thank you. And by the way, the Campton Baptist Church, I think, is the church that I featured on the promo for this
Yeah,
program. So if you want to see what that looks like, go back and look at that. Um, okay, so we're with you, Gary. So let's just stay with you. What did you and the church, or the school in this case, need to do to prepare for solar? I mean, you don't just walk out and put a solar system on. You have to do some stuff to get from A to B.
well,
And
well,
so
I did
what you-
three things. I did want to do a school because I wanted students to become aware of alternative energy, solar, and this installation, as well as others, are highly instrumented. A student can go online and get solar production that day, April versus June, 9 o'clock in the morning versus noon, all sorts of things. So I wanted to do a school, and I picked this school because it was south facing and had just about the ideal roof angle. That's one thing I had to do. The second thing I had to do was go to the local board of education and persuade them that this would be a good thing to do. And by the way, it would save them a substantial amount of money on their electricity. And I think the latter was the most important point, because they are starved for funds, but they certainly recognize the importance of student awareness. And all of these projects, I had to find a really good installation company. And I picked a company out of Danville, Kentucky called Wilderness Trace that is also evangelical about solar and love to do work for churches and schools. And the third thing I did in preparation was I got the local utility company, which was a rural co-op owned by the local folks, to have them enthusiastic about the projects. And they were a big help. They actually did the hookup to the grid and some things like that gratis because they agreed with the project. So.
Great. Okay, back to you, John. Where would you like to go?
Well, the next slide, I think, is how we prepared.
Let's see.
Back up there somewhere.
Yeah, one more. There we go.
Yeah, so having committed as a congregation to act on this, I guess I should also point out it was part of a wider green initiative across all aspects of church life. We called it green learning, green faith, green worship, and green action, or something like that. And of course, the facilities piece was part of the action component. So some steps that we went through in thinking about this and in figuring out how to share it with the congregation and do the education that was required in order for them to be committed to this. That's probably the first step, is to find out how much your congregation is committed to this and do the bits and pieces of education that might be required to get them on board. Another thing that we felt was really important is to name the goal correctly. Is to say, we're a little bit of education about the climate and what's the cause of climate change, and you arrive at a correct statement of the goal, which is to be net zero carbon and zero waste across every aspect of the institution. So we felt it was important to state what the goal was, even though we knew we couldn't get there. Even after a few years, it was going to be difficult. And there seemed to be some, in the way people were talking about it, there were some sort of wrong ways to name the goal. And one of those we felt was to say, well, we want to be sustainable. And that's, technically correct, but it's only correct if you use the correct version, the correct definition of the word sustainable. And we had just had an engineering study done for the church to decide whether the church facility was sustainable in the wrong sense of the term, which is, could we go on doing things the way we were doing them indefinitely and still survive as an institution? And unfortunately, that's the way the word sustainable is often used. It had nothing to do with the sustainability of the ecosystems of the planet. So the word sustainable is kind of slippery and overused, as I'm sure many of you realize. The other wrong way to talk about it, we felt, was to talk about reducing your carbon footprint. No, we have to say the goal is to be net zero carbon, or else you're not really solving the problem. And I have to confess, of course, we're not there yet with our entire operations, all aspects of the operation. We are not net zero carbon. Probably not. No, we're not even net zero carbon for our utility usage. But you still have to name the goal as part of the way that you educate people about this. The next thing was we knew that we needed to do a complete facilities approach. For one thing, there was no point in sizing the need for solar if we still had antiquated heating systems in the building and incandescent light bulbs around the building and horrendously leaky windows, and so forth. It all had to be planned together. So we did a comprehensive facilities approach in order to even get at the correct number of predicting our future electrical usage. And then finally, shout out to Green Umbrella here and so forth, joining networks and coalitions to help educate ourselves. So that's how we prepared. And I guess the big piece of that is the development of a comprehensive facility approach, which I'll have a little bit more to say about later on.
So this was really a process for you. It took several years, right, to kind of get to the point where you were ready, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Murray, you want to have it this one?
Yeah, and I don't need any slides.
Okay.
So for our plan, about 8 years ago, we had a comprehensive energy audit done of our building. It cost us about $4 grand to do that. And it told us that we needed to switch over to LEDs and, shore up some insulation and windows. And we did all that. And they didn't have any solar panels in the original energy audit. So we asked them to go back and figure out solar panels. And they said, well, it's not going to pay for itself in any reasonable amount of time. And they did that. And they said, yeah, you can put a solar array this size on your roof and it'll pay off in about 20 years. And we had that added to the report. And we took that to our congregational boards, and at Genesis, we have 3. We have the Genesis board, which I'm president of right now, and we have the 2 congregational boards. And one of the congregational boards was very against getting a loan to do this. And that's really the only way we saw that we were going to get the funding for it. And I'll talk about the funding later. And so for about 5 years, we just kind of sat on our fingers. We switched to LEDs, but saved money where we could with our green team. But finally, we learned about the investor model, which I'm going to talk about under financing. And we had 3 meetings with potential investors, and we went from there. And that's basically how we got our solar system planned and started. And I also wanted to add that we got even before we had our investor meetings, we got 4 quotes from 4 different local installers. And we picked the cheapest one after checking their references.
So it sounds like it was not necessarily a linear process either. It's you had some starts and stops. So that's that's not surprising. I mean, I wanted to make that point to the audience. Okay, so now we're going to talk about financing. And since you're on the spotlight, why don't we just go ahead and let you talk about how you did the financing. Murray?
Oh, me? I'm
Yep,
sorry.
yep, you're up, if that's
I
okay.
keep hearing someone else's name. I'm sorry.
Nope,
So
sorry,
financing, we used an investor
must be
model.
my Ohio accent.
Yeah, well, I'm originally from Ohio too. So So for our financing, we use an investor model. And the only reason we did that was to take advantage of the 30% tax credit, which back then went down to 26% last year, but now it's back up to 30. And in order to do that, the House of Worship can't take that credit. They don't pay taxes. So what we did is we formed an LLC with 20 investors, about 10 from each congregation. And they each invested about, well, at least 5K. And some of them invested 15 or 10K because our installation was going to cost 120, and that maxed out our roof space for panels. And the 20 investors wrote checks. And once we had all the checks, we had our installer, which is Homeland Solar of Ann Arbor, and they were 20% cheaper than the other 3 quotes. They installed the panels in February of 2020, and we actually they installed them starting in December of 2019, and we went live in February of 2020, and that's the way we funded it. And it's a great model. You could still use it, even though churches can now take advantage of the federal tax credit because they've changed the law. So you don't need to be a for-profit entity to get the credit. You can just get a check from the government this year, starting this year. That's it.
Did you form an LLC or anything?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's the way we had to do it. We formed an LLC with the 20 members. It's called Eastover Power. And the name Eastover comes from the street that Genesis is on. It's a side street. It's called Eastover Boulevard. And we called it Eastover Power, but not because we're located on Eastover. It's because it's the combination of our combined spring holidays. The Episcopal Church celebrates Easter and the Reformed congregation celebrates Passover. So that's how we got the Eastover.
Good move. Yeah.
Very clever. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Now we're going the other direction. So we'll head for John. I think you're up in my.
Okay, I have one with the picture of our building on it. We could start there.
Okay, so let's see. That one?
Nope, not seeing it there.
Okay. I thought I saw one like that.
Right where we left off.
I think Ken, I think you're on the wrong window. I think you need to unshare and go to the PowerPoint.
Well, I thought that's what I had done, but maybe I didn't. Thank you. Yeah, no wonder.
Okay, one before that. Yeah, there we go. So this is what is the actual? Oh, yes. Now we're talking about costs and funding. So
Yep.
So next slide is a picture of our building, and you'll see what a messy hodgepodge it is there. That's a Google satellite view. 4 buildings from 4 different historical periods back to the 1880s. And there's my little sketch at the bottom, trying to identify every possible roof surface, as Murray just mentioned. So we took that same approach to every possible roof surface. So there are 197 panels. It cost us $150. For anybody in Cincinnati area that wants to know, there's our contractor, Solar Energy Solutions. They did a great job. So I think the next slide talks about our funding, our approach to thinking about funding. We did, when a couple of church members did some research into the LLC model and other things that were available at the time in 2018 and 19, and didn't find them very attractive, at least from what we could learn. So we did it in other ways. And I guess quite a bit, this is sort of obsolete now, I guess, if the federal government's going to be supportive. So here's here's how we did it. Looking at the funding, we said we can raise it, we can find it, and we can borrow it, but we have to do it. Once we were committed to the project, to the idea of, again, the whole facility transformation is what I'm talking about here for the funding. So we raised some of the money. We had a capital campaign in the congregation that raised $750,000 actually for 3 different projects. And those items listed there, new windows, LED lighting, and new heat pump air conditioning to take the place of 50-year-old gas-fired boilers. So we raised $320 for the building upgrades. We found some money. One way of looking at this is that we presented the finance committee with the fact that over the next 20 years, we were going to be spending $500,000, giving $500,000 to the gas and electric company. And so, and that was going to be, we could have just kept on doing that, or we could identify some of that money to give to the building improvements instead. And then that would save, of course, utility costs down the road. So the slogan was, it's the same money, either give it to Duke Energy or put it into our building and reduce our dependence on them. And more importantly, our contributions to the global warming. We also found opportunity to borrow some from the Presbyterian denomination, offered low interest, very low interest loans. And it's that piece, that 150,000 there is what was actually used to pay for the solar array. But I guess I should point out in parentheses, as soon as the solar panels were up there, practically, we had a bequest from a member who passed away and paid off the loan immediately. So those kind of things happen in a church when everybody is committed to the outcome. So that was my advice as of 2 or 3 years ago: raise it, find it, and borrow it, but do it. And so anyway, that's our financial story. So that's it until the next question.
Okay. Alrighty, Gary.
Okay, put on the next slide.
Okay, let's see, here we are.
That's it.
This one here.
Yes, this one. Okay, hang on. Everyone knows about the 30% tax credit, but there's also ways of getting another 30 or 40%. And that's what I want to talk about. And I'm going to use a little bit more than 4 minutes because this is sort of unbelievable, and I need to go through it in detail. Well, there's 2, as we've talked, there's a incentive available for solar, the 30% federal tax credit, but there's a bigger one called accelerated depreciation. The Republican administration, when they took power in 2016, passed a whole bunch of laws regarding investment in capital equipment, and one of them was the ability to depreciate material used in a business the first year, as opposed to a many-year schedule. In fact, you can depreciate almost anything the first year except for a building. Now, those apply to taxpayers. Neither has applied to profit. So 3 or 4 years ago, I put a lot of thought into how a nonprofit could act like an individual. And the way I came up with is for an individual to do the project and get the 30% tax credit and the accelerated depreciation. And I want to go through that in detail, but let me show you the end result for Campton Elementary. The Campton system was 30 kilowatts because that was all Kentucky allowed at the time. Since then, we've raised it to 45. But that 30 kilowatts produces 40,000 kilowatt hours annually, and they are paying 12 cents a kilowatt hour. So the value of that electricity produced was $5,040. And my company, Starshine Energy, leases the array to the school for $1,800 a year. So it leads them to a savings of $3,000 annually. And I've used a similar leasing arrangement for a much bigger array at Eastern Kentucky University right on the campus, and another one at Morehead State University. So let me go over the details now and exactly how this works. So I can have the next slide. Okay, the cost of the system was $60,000. This is for the 30 kilowatts. The tax credit at 30% was $18,000. You can do accelerated depreciation for 85% of the cost. The rule is if you take a tax credit, you have to subtract half the tax credit from the depreciation. So that led to an accelerated depreciation of $51,000. Now, I was in the 30% tax bracket, so that depreciation was worth to me $18,870. So if you combine the tax credit and the accelerated depreciation, I'm getting help from the federal government for $36,870. Therefore, my out-of-pocket cost was $23,100. And since I'm doing this as a business, I decided an 8% rate of return would persuade the IRS that I was serious about this. So that led to the lease cost of $1,800. And to make that work, I created a company, Starshine Energy, which is an LLC. And since I'm the sole proprietor, it does a pass-through. In other words, the economics of the company are basically my economics. And for this logic to work, the individual or company needs to be paying federal income tax at a high level. In my case, my Procter & Gamble retirement was a cash lump sum, which I rolled over into an IRA. But then when I became 71, I had to take mandatory withdrawals, which were taxed at normal income. And rather than pay tax on those withdrawals, I decided to put that tax money into solar. I guess being a chemist, I titrated my projects against the estimated tax. And Murray used an expression earlier. It's the same money, but my logic was rather than pay federal income tax, put the money into something that would benefit, in this case, the school, the community. And Starshine Energy.
Screaming at each other about the script, and then by lunchtime, you'd say.
Would we mute yourself, please, people?
Starshine Energy doesn't own the property on any of our installations, just the hardware. And in effect, as far as the organization is concerned, this is identical to an organization leasing a copier. For the two universities, we do have elaborate contracts that protect the school and Starshine in case of my death, so on and so forth. Okay, go on to the next slide. To sum this up, it takes three things for this approach to work. There has to be an individual or business paying federal income tax. If it's an individual, that person needs to be willing to create a company, which is not difficult. The company needs to have access to a good contractor. The individual needs to be something of an evangelist on the importance of alternative energy. And I created this company not at all to make money. It was purely because I saw this as a way to get solar in universities and schools and churches as a way so that students could learn about it. Now, in theory, I'm interested in that you formed a group of individuals that formed an LLC, and a group of individuals could do what I did, which would make it possible to do much bigger projects. The organization setup would be more complex in that the arrangement has to consider what happens when an individual leaves the group or dies or something like that. In my case, since it's a sole proprietorship, that makes it straightforward to meld the company results into my financial structure. And now my next phase on this is to figure out how to ultimately give these solar complexes to either the church or the university or the elementary school that my company now owns. If I simply donate it, there's no tax advantage because you can't take a charitable deduction on something that you've already taken accelerated depreciation on. My best plot after a number of years, and I'm below the radar of the IRS, is to sell the whole thing to the organization, to the church or school at a sweetheart price. And that way can do it. But in the meantime, I, as an individual, have gotten these solar systems going in organizations that couldn't otherwise afford them. So I would strongly recommend that all of you, as well as becoming social engineers and forming groups and having strategies, become tax engineers, because there's an awful lot there.
Okay, thank you. All righty. I'm going to open it up a bit and just ask each of the speakers to give them some time to say whatever it is they didn't get a chance to say during my pre-programmed questions, and just have at it. And then after that, we'll do questions from the audience. Okay, we're at Gary. So Gary, you have anything more you want to say on this?
No, except what I presented was actually fairly complicated. And if anyone wants to talk about it, I'd be happy to talk about it at ad nauseum. So
Well, I suspect we will get questions about it. Okay, so then we go back to, let's see, John, I think is the next one back on the line here.
Yeah, John, I'm John. I had a few extra slides, but I think I can do really quickly. There's a few points in there that
Sure. Tell me what,
I could mention, and then yeah, just show a couple more pictures here. The basic facts of the system. Go ahead to the next one.
okay,
Basic facts of the system. That's pretty straightforward. It's very comparable to what anybody else would have. One point I think I want to point out is that the roof angles here you can see are going every which way. The big roofs there are facing southeast, and then we have this sort of apse-shaped piece that's going all the way around. And a couple of us who were leading this effort at the church had already done this on our homes, and we had discovered by monitoring the hardware that the roof angles make less difference than you would think. I mean, the conventional wisdom is you have to have a south-facing roof, but a lot of other angles, including flat, work practically just as well. So if your situation doesn't have a lot of south sloping roof, go ahead and do some others. I think there's more on the next slide. Our biggest set of panels actually is on flat roof, and they do just fine. I got one more slide again, since we were doing it without a lot of attention to the return on investment. Our home systems use the conventional number of 7 to 10 years for a recovery. But then even with our situation of not using the tax credit, we looked at it as, well, whatever the return is, you're still going to get your free electricity for another 20 to 30 years. So a long term, I guess that's one of the points here. We are long-term institutions, and the usual sort of ROI rationale is a short-term situation. Another argument that one of our committee members observed is that compared to the return on an investment in invested endowment, which you may draw 4%, 5%, something like that. Putting the money into a solar system can give you a bigger return than that, as long as we preserve net metering. And besides that, from a moral religious context, return on investment is really not the point. We need to save the climate. So that's kind of on another level. And what's important for faith communities, I would also say, is that we need to be out there showing the world that it can be done. And when it's not, and really how simple it is, as some of you are all pointing out, and advocate for changes in the ways that it can be made more advantageous and simpler yet. And then I think right at the end, I had a couple of other observations about our experience. Just a couple of quick things. This has already been mentioned. Get multiple bids from non-residential installers. Make sure they understand the complexity of permitting and metering. Make sure that your roof is in good enough shape to outlast the panels. And I already mentioned that multiple roof angles are still quite effective. And then the other next slide, I think, is about the overall facilities plan. We had some unfortunate experiences with people wanting to give us advice or even wanting to do an energy audit who are actually selling products. And those turned out to be unsuccessful, sort of unfortunate situations. So you should always start with experts, consultants who are not selling products, and pay for your energy audit, as I think Marie mentioned earlier on. And of course, we're dealing with historic structures, so there's a whole set of extra issues with those in a historic district. So that's it. That's all I've got.
Okay, great. And Murray, do you have something you would like to add besides what you've already said?
Yeah, could you show my second slide?
Sure.
All right, so
A minute,
I just wanted to mention a few things. Our LLC will donate the panels back to Genesis after 20 years, and the LLC is making 2% a year on their money. And we're using depreciation over time to offset the electricity payments that Genesis is making to Eastover Power. They're paying for the solar at a rate of about 2 cents lower than what our utility provider charges DTE. So that's they're making 2% on their money each year. I also wanted to talk about Solar Faithful, which is a new initiative here in Michigan, and I'm actually president of the board of that. And it's a combination of organizations came together to form this Solar Faithful nonprofit. It's the Climate Witness Project, World Renew, Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, and Chart House Energy, which is a for-profit company. And we've been partnering to offer houses of worship free solar at no cost. And we're guaranteeing a payment for the solar electricity generated from those installations of 10% less than they're paying their utility over the years. They're entering into a 25-year power purchase agreement. And there are about 6 houses of worship already enrolled in a pilot project that will be funded that way. And we're using an investment company to provide the money, and the numbers work out so that, you know, we can do this. And it's really a no-brainer. You get a solar panel installation, no upfront costs, no cost to maintain it, fully insured, and it's and you're paying 10% less for the solar energy generated. So we've talked about, if this works in Michigan, to spreading out to other states, and Ohio would be a no-brainer for that. And there's nothing to say that a group of like-minded people could start the same thing in Ohio right now. And my slide is it shows, I think there's 8 different congregations, houses of worship, and or nonprofits that have used the investor model that I talked about for Genesis. And it represents a total of 534 solar panels and about almost $500,000 investment. And it's just a summary of, no, it's tough to read, but it's just a summary of what can be done. They all use the same model.
Ken, I do have one more thing I'd like to talk about. Could you put on my last slide?
Let's see, where are you? You're up at you're at the end. Okay.
Yeah, the one with the graph.
Yeah, just go ahead here.
This is one thing I would encourage all of you to do. I mentioned that students could go online and look at solar performance and so forth. And this is January's energy production for the elementary school. And you can see there's a lot of learning in here. You can see there's big variation day to day, and that's useful. And just as an aside, my company is trying to make an artificial intelligence system that will predict solar output for the next 7 days. And this is our running report card. the green is our prediction, the blue is what it actually was. And it's getting to the point where it's actually useful because you can glance at the chart. It's not within 10 or 15% yet, but you can see which days are going to be good days and which days are going to be bad days. And I think I'll play with this another year. I'm going to be able to sell this to utility companies who have both solar and natural gas fired generators. But the point I'm going to make on this, I would encourage all of you to hook your solar panels on houses of worship to the internet. Tell local high schools you have it, and encourage them, the kids, to come and have access to data like this, and be willing to talk to them about solar and the importance of understanding this. That's practical evangelism in a sense. So,
Okay, great. Right, well, thank you all. I really think we need to give a round of thanks, applause, whatever we can do here electronically for our speakers tonight, because they really put a lot of time and effort into this, and it was great presentation as far as I'm concerned. We do have an upcoming Faith Community Go Green event. Ann, could you speak to that and tell folks what that's going to be?
Yes, absolutely. So thank you to the presenters tonight. I was really inspired to see all of the different ways that you've gone about this. And for those of you who are also intrigued and want to learn more about how to potentially fund projects like this at your house of worship, we are going to have a follow-up webinar in March. And I think I've just tentatively set the date for March 14th, which is also going to be a Tuesday evening. And this will be a presentation by Dan Brissett, who's the president of the Environmental and Energy Study Institute in DC. And he's going to talk especially about how houses of worship can get access to federal funding for energy efficiency projects, and also some of the new opportunities that have come through with the IRA. So be on the lookout for your emails about that, and you'll be able to sign up for that follow-up.
Okay.
And I think we had a few questions in the chat here, Ken, if you want to.
If you would, yeah.
Yeah.
I saw one question, which is, do any of these systems have batteries? Yes, one of my installations is off-grid battery powered. It's at Moorhead University. It's serving as a pilot plant for what it would take to divorce yourself from the utilities altogether. And we're learning a lot from that.
Good. Okay, Ann, you want to sort of referee the question?
Yeah, so there's another question here about how does the 30% tax incentive work now for nonprofits with the new regulations?
There's a simple answer to that. We don't know. The bill says it will happen, and the various federal agencies are writing the regulations for exactly what data you have to have and so forth, but those don't yet exist. But we have faith in our government that they will, don't we?
I'm hopeful that maybe by the time we have that March workshop, we may have a little more information on things like that.
There are a few indications, though, that you used to just be a tax credit. Now they will just send you a check. If you put $200,000 system in and it's 30%, they will just write you a $60,000 check. And that's whether you're a private investor, you're just putting it on your house, or you're putting it on a church or anything else.
But
there may or may not be some requirements on that. I think if it's a small enough system, you're exempt from those. But the larger systems, there may be some requirements on labor and materials. That have to be.
There's supposedly additional incentives there. If you get it locally sourced, you get a few more percentage. If you get it with prevailing labor, a few more percentage. That was my hand raised.
It's all to be determined.
Actually, there's one very important fact there, and that is in certain underserved communities, like much of Eastern Kentucky, it's 40% instead of 30% on the basic tax credit. And Ohio and Michigan have their fair share of those.
Yep.
Okay, Ann, go ahead.
So another question we got here was net metering. John, I think you had a little comment about this in one of your slides. Does it still exist in Ohio?
Yes, it does. We all see on our utility bills that the amount of electricity that comes in and the amount that goes out, and we pay the difference.
So essentially, I'm wondering if everyone knows what net metering is. do you want to explain that really?
Yeah, it just means that if you generate electricity in your solar panel array that you are not using, it runs your meter backwards, basically. And it sort of reduces the usage that was previously calibrated by the utility company. And so you only pay the difference.
That
So
depends.
it really adds, in those states that no longer have it, it's really pretty devastating to the economic model of having solar on your house, at least. So
To
it's kind of
some
important to advocate for that to continue.
to some extent, it depends on the utility. In one of my church installations in Kentucky, they just simply run the meter backwards if you produce more than you need. But in central Kentucky, the utility simply pays you a nominal amount for the extra electricity and doesn't run the meter back. And both of those go under the label, quote, net metering, but they're
Right.
very different from each
Works
other.
either way.
Yeah, Ohio law is a little different than Kentucky, but in both cases, that we're using the net metering use the utility like a battery. So
Yeah.
it's not making power at night, for example, and you want to have a meeting at your church, your house of worship. You have to get power from somewhere. You just get it from utility, and during the day when you're making more, you basically paying them back. So it's a handy, very handy for the individual institution.
So
It's
there's a
very-
question here for Murray regarding the LLC and the congregation paying monthly to the LLC. Is that based on consumption or is it a flat rate?
It's a flat rate, and the rate is 11.5 cents per kilowatt hour for the next 20 years, at which time the panels will be donated. So that's a flat rate. Now, we do not have net metering in Michigan, which makes it much less cost effective to get solar. And about 10% of our electricity does go back on the grid. We don't use it right away. And our utility DTE, or Detroit Edison, gives us about 7.5% for each kilowatt hour we put back on the grid. But if we were have to pay for electricity, we're paying 13.5 cents. So it's about 60% of the rate that we would pay. So it's kind of like if you put solar back on the grid, it's the wholesale rate, but if you're buying it from them, it's the retail rate.
But by the way, to go back to my tax structure of using both the depreciation and the credit, I can generally make electricity for just a little bit over 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So using those two together really make a whopping difference. In fact, I think I can make electricity cheaper than the utilities in Kentucky can, because I don't have to worry about telephone poles and repair wagons and so forth.
So just to be extra clear about that, Murray, so you said it's 11.6 cents per kilowatt hour, but so it's a flat rate, but is it based on consumption per month?
Yes. So,
Okay, so the actual monthly payment goes up and down based on usage, but it's at a fixed rate.
that's correct. We pay 11.5 cents per solar kilowatt hour generated.
Great.
And we actually have 3 electric meters in our system. We have the regular meter that DTE charges for the power they generate. We have a solar meter, which measures the amount of solar generated, and we have an output meter, which measures the amount that we're putting back on the grid. So we actually have 3 meters.
So another question here, without a battery backup, are all of these schemes dependent on the legislature not changing the rules about net metering in Ohio? Can you directly use the electricity when there's not excess without relying on the utility company paying you something?
Sure.
Well, I think Murray said that already, that in Michigan, where they don't have net metering, that yes, you can make it work. So, the smaller your system is compared to your total usage, I guess the bigger advantage that is for you, because you're using almost all your electrons locally instead of giving them to the utility.
And that's the reason, we don't want to size in Michigan. If you size a system more than 30 to 40% of electricity that you're using, you're going to be putting a lot of electricity on the grid, and it's not going to be cost effective.
Interesting, in Kentucky, that's a form of evangelism because many of the utility companies are co-ops. They're owned by the local people. And if you pump energy back into, and actually they're a nonprofit, if you pump energy back into those, you're benefiting the community as opposed to DTE or Duke Energy.
So would any of the companies or LLCs presenting tonight be willing to invest in Cincinnati-based projects? The Eastover LLC, or Gary, your company, or are you primarily interested in your local areas?
Well, I've been interested in my local area because it's so depressed, and this is a way to help. Ohio, in contrast, is hugely affluent. So,
Yeah, we've been asked that question, and we do have some of the investors who'd be willing to invest anywhere. I mean, a solar panel in Ohio does as much good to me for global warming as one in Michigan or China. So yes, and as I mentioned, Solar Faithful, we are enrolling Michigan houses of worship right now, but if there's a big impetus from Ohio to do this, I mean, we can probably include Ohio in it too. Just contact me and we'll see what we can do.
And I'm talking with other investors in Kentucky to form something like what Mary was talking about, and doing a really large a megawatt and a half array that so it would take several investors to do that and harvest the tax advantages and so forth. So there's really no limit to what an LLC can be. It's more complicated if it's got several individuals as opposed to one, but Mary made the point that it's still manageable. Although, Mary, on your LLC, what if an individual for whatever reason wants to bail out?
All right, well, yeah, there's a agreement that there were 3 agreements. One was a power purchase agreement between Eastover and Genesis, but one of the agreements was for the investor setting up the LLC. And one of our congregations insisted that in perpetuity that these members be congregants of one of the 2 congregations. So that's what we did. So it's gonna, if someone dies or someone wants to get out, they have to sell their share, or their estate has to sell their share to another congregant.
Got it.
Here's one more question. How does property insurance for these systems work?
I haven't insured any of mine other than liability.
So is it just tied into the property insurance for that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when we put our system on St. Simon's, we called up the insurance company, which is a company called, oddly enough, Church Insurance. And they said, yeah, it'll be an extra $60-some a year to cover it. And that's what we did.
That's not a big expense. Now, we need to talk about 2 insurances for Eastover. First of all, the panels themselves, liability, that was just added to that Genesis's policy. And actually they reassessed the value of our building, and they added what the solar panels cost, $120K to the value of our building. Our bill actually went down because our building isn't worth as much as they thought it was. So the other thing you need for an LLC is insurance to make sure that the members don't get sued. And that costs maybe $400 a year. And it also, like if the treasurer would to abscond with all the money in the checking account and run off to Mexico, it would repay us that. So it's not going to happen, but it's good to have that extra insurance.
I have had some damage to my panels. Kids mowing around the panels, or a mower hits a rock and breaks one of the panels, and I just replaced it, and that's part of the cost of doing business for my lease arrangement.
Mick is asking, what's the lifespan of an array?
Well, the panels themselves 30 to 40 years, and they don't, the output just slowly degrades. And maybe at 30 years, it would be producing 80% of what it was new, but it's still not worth replacing. By the way, on my array at Morehead State University, I'm tracking the sun, and I'll have panels that I'm not tracking. So I'm going to be able to measure whether the tracking hardware is worth what it costs over the simplicity of having a fixed panel. And another thing that most people don't know is the angle in the wintertime, the sun is weaker than it is in the summertime, but panels are more efficient when they're cold than when they're warm. So to some extent, winter helps production.
Now, what about the, we talked about longevity, the other piece of it is the inverters. Do you have provisions for replacing inverters in your scheme?
Yeah, I'm planning on about 15 years. That's just from what the manufacturers have said. So
Yeah, the same with Genesis. We collected 130K instead of the cost, which was 120K, and that extra 10 will pay for the inverter and some of the expenses for the LLC.
Where I've had the greatest difficulty is actually the internet connections. You know, there's every situation is different, and we have to scramble to get it done. We always can, but it's never as simple as you think it's going to be. And we don't want the kids logging on to have to use passwords or anything like that. So it's got to be a site that you don't care if the Russians hacked into it. We'll tell the Russians what we're doing. They might learn something. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that my partner in crime here, Ed Lynn from the Ann Arbor First Unitarian Universalist Church, is here. And he's actually got a windmill too. He's got solar panels and a windmill. Maybe he could talk a little bit about what he's done.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So briefly, we put in a windmill about 10 years ago. It would never pay for itself, but as Gary mentioned, it's making a statement and helping it out. But we've got about 25,000 kilowatts on the roof right now. We're going to put another 100,000 up there in this fall. So, and we've already raised the money to do it. Now I'm just looking at waiting for the government incentive programs to see how much money I can save on this and what we have to do. But Gary, your thing about accelerated your bit about accelerated depreciation, that might send me forming an LLC again, because we're also going to put in heat pumps in the whole side of the building and stuff like that, and that might we're $100,000 short, and that might get me home. So
well, heat pumps would fall beautifully under what you can accelerate in 1 year, depreciate in 1 year.
So okay, so yeah, but our system runs what same people. The person who put in Murray's system put in our system because he's a member of our congregation, and he's going to do the new system too. So we do have some in-house expertise. We were fortunate in that to do it. So, but and to go back to John's point, our goal is zero carbon neutrality, zero emissions for the entire site. We have 46 acres, so we've got landscape committees. Yeah, we got a whole lot to do there. So,
but by the way, even though this is mission work, it's good for the planet and all like that. It's also wickedly fun to sort out all these systems.
Oh yes, yeah. Wickedly fun.
Maybe Christians aren't supposed to have fun, but to have some problem and then have a group of people solve it. That's what life is about.
Yep. So,
any other questions there, Ann?
There are a few more questions in the chat. By the way, folks, you can feel free to jump into. You don't have to rely on me to read them for you. But Kyle had asked about renewable energy credits or switching to renewable energy sourcing if you can't do solar at this time. That is actually what my congregation has done in the near term, because with the current age of our roof and so forth, we weren't in a position to consider solar right now. And that was an option that's available through your power supplier in a lot of areas. So we looked into that and did that. But I think it's a little, probably a separate conversation beyond the scope of this as well. Let's see, we have a question about what do you do with the snow on the solar panels in Michigan? Do you have to do anything to remove it? How does it affect power production?
Yeah, so, yeah, when the snow covers the panels, we're not getting any power. And I actually have solar panels on my house as of August this year. They went live, and I've had like 0 energy generated for the last week. And generally in the winter, the snow melts off within a few days. Right now we're having a cold snap, and it's going to be about probably another maybe 10 days it's going to take this time for the snow to melt off. But essentially you get no power if there's snow on it. Now you can go up and brush it off, but it's not worth climbing on the roof for that.
Right.
If they're on the ground, maybe.
I imagine the steep ones at Mount Auburn probably don't collect much snow.
No, the snow would not stick to those steep ones, but
I guess that's an advantage. What about land-based panels versus roof?
well, there's one issue there that involves the carbon cost of the framework that you need to put on, and that's where a comprehensive consideration of the carbon cost, not just your energy that you're, offsetting, but the cost of the whole installation. Is much less steel involved in putting them on a roof than there is in building footings and a more elaborate steel framework. So that's definitely a factor.
Gotcha. And then the last question here, is there any pushback on induction stoves and heat pumps? I guess on installing them or using them in your house of worship?
Well, if we had a Zoom session this afternoon with a geothermal installer, which obviously is heat pumps, and the default system, at least in Cincinnati, is always a natural gas furnace. But the furnace people don't seem to have, actually, they seem excited about the prospect of more people using geothermal.
Geothermal can be tough. We've got it here on my house.
Yeah.
But at the church, I looked into that, and that versus a heat pump system for one whole wing of our facility. And it turns out if you've got a well hanging, if you got a water well there, at least here you have to put the geothermal system 200 feet away from that well, which then made the heat pump system a little over $500,000.
Yeah.
And the geothermal system would be $1.5 million.
Yeah.
So that's a big consideration.
Ohio doesn't have restrictions like that. You almost always hit groundwater at about 30 or 40 feet. And they just drill through it, and there's water at part of the pipe, and it's ignored. So yeah, we read the Michigan instructions on installing geothermal, and it goes for 12 single-space typewritten pages.
Oh yeah.
Ohio, we can't find one for Ohio.
Yeah, we looked at geothermal, but we don't have the land space. It's a very tight urban lot, and the parking lot is built on fill, so there's not much to work with. But our newest heat pump system is what's called a VRF, a variable refrigerant flow, that's zoned. There's a separate little unit in each room. They all run off the same compressor, so there's no gas, there's no combustion involved. It's a heat pump, but it's air to air. It does not involve the earth.
So in case anyone has further follow-up questions for any of the presenters or Ken or myself, I'm going to ask everyone to maybe put their email in one more time. And Ken, I think someone maybe had a question for you about the solar moonshot grants. So if you could put your email in there too, that would be great.
I will do that. And they seem to be interested in doing business here. They just communicated to me, please do write up a little write-up and advertise the fact that they exist. So I encourage people to talk to them if they're, if you're interested. I can give you more details about our experience.
Actually, you raise an interesting question about the modern design heat pumps. one thing that Ken and I've talked a lot about at Maple Knoll is have heat pumps advanced to the point that you don't really need geothermal. You know, can the air exchange systems work? Have they gotten sufficiently efficient that you could use
Yes, that's
those?
in architecture now. I think that the most advanced system available is the variable refrigerant flow zoned heat pump system.
Yeah. Of course, that's more expensive too.
It's not near as much as geothermal. So
I love the beauty of extracting energy from the earth
oh yeah,
as you do with geothermal. So
It's just costly.
well, it's in Cincinnati, it's about $2,000 a well. And the main difference between a conventional system and a geothermal system is the wells.
Mhm.
So
Right.
our building at Maple Knoll, we're looking at if it's 15 tons, we'd need 15 wells, and that's $30,000. You know, that on a building that's going to last a long time for such a beautiful system, I'm not sure that's expensive.
No, that's a lot less than what we're paying up here. I put in 30,000 just for this house here, and this is like a 2,000 square foot house, so.
On my 2,000 is just the well and the piping in it, and we've had that number from several installers, so that seems to be pretty good. And it could be 3,000, but the point's the same.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you all for attending, and thank you again to the speakers for their presentation and really getting us educated and hopefully inspired. And I hope to see questions and interest from folks in the audience, and hopefully we can get you started on a project to do some thermal at your house of worship. And we'll see you maybe not next month, but in March at our other event on the 14th.
Good.
Thank you all, and good
Thank you,
night.
Ken.
Well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. It was very, very interesting, very educational.
Thank you, Ken, and all the panelists. It was a great program.
Thanks.
Well, thank all of you. We evangelists love an audience. So
Oh, life is exciting.
Well, I see some familiar faces. Hello to welcome to everybody there.
Okay.
Where should the sun go?
What?
Okay, it is 7 o'clock. Should we get started or do you want to wait a little bit more?
I'm out. Is Jason in here?
Okay, I do want to let people know that we are recording tonight's webinar. It's already set up and you should see a little indicator on your screen that says recording.